Welcome to this episode of the Essential Church Podcast, an ongoing conversation about some of the most important issues facing the local church today. I'm your host, Andrew Arndt, and this was a fun conversation to have. My good friend Daniel Grothe and I recently sat down to talk about this book, Streams in the Wasteland, Finding Spiritual Renewal with the Desert Fathers and Mothers, written by yours truly. We released it about a week ago. This is kind of a deep dive into the spirituality of the Desert Fathers and Mothers. A lot of people don't know very much about them, but these were really the forerunners of the monastic movement. And about 5 years ago, I got thrown into an experience that took me deeply into their wisdom and really reshaped my life. So this book is kind of a reflection on that. I hope that you enjoy the interview. It was a really fun conversation to have. And I just sincerely hope also that you'll go out and grab the book. You can buy it wherever fine books are sold. Without further commentary from me, here's to the conversation.
Well, Andrew Arndt, here we are today, a week after the release of your second book, Streams in the Wasteland, Finding Spiritual Renewal with the Desert Fathers and Mothers. And I got this book about 3 months ago. PDF. I just got my advanced reader, but this book is excellent, like you are excellent, Andrew. There's not a wasted word. It's thoughtful, and you're taking us into the tradition of the Desert Fathers and Mothers. Mm-hmm. And I, after writing a couple books myself, I think that a book chooses us.
Yeah.
You just can't get away from saying the things that there's a demand on you to say.
Yeah.
So why is this book, Streams in the Wasteland, this Desert Fathers and Mothers, why did this book demand that you write it?
Yeah. I mean, it's not the kind of book that I was thinking about writing 15 years ago. Right. Getting started in ministry, I would have never imagined writing it. It's really not even a book 5 years ago I was thinking about writing. Sometimes life just kind of has a way of pushing you in directions that open your mind up to things and open your heart up to things. And all of a sudden, like you said, the book chooses you. The work is kind of there for you to do. So the story with Streams in the Wasteland, I have known about the Desert Fathers and Mothers for a long time. I think that my first real introduction to them was via the work of Richard Foster, a lot of years ago. So like you, I'm born and raised non-denominational, Pentecostal, charismatic. And so most of the reading in our tribe in the 80s and the 90s, was reading by a couple guys named Kenneth and Oral Roberts and Marilyn Hickey.
And lots of sermons. Lots of sermons.
That was it. And so when I'm 16 or 17 years old, I'm in the middle of a real spiritual awakening. I felt like I was finding my faith for the first time, finding God for the first time in a really personal way, and was so hungry mentally. Mm-hmm. Just wanted to read whatever I could. I got my hands on C.S. Lewis, and that was a big thing for me. But I just wanted more. And I remember coming downstairs one day, and my mom had a copy of Richard Foster's The Celebration of Discipline on the island, and I'd never seen a book like that before in our world. And I said, Mom, where'd you get that book? And she said, well, our pastor recommended that I read it. He had just read it. He thought I might like it. Mm-hmm. I said, well, is it good? Are you liking it? She goes, it's great. And I said, well, when you're done, can I take a peek at it? And she said, sure. So I remember sitting down with the Celebration of Discipline for the first time and devouring it. Here is this simple life, a vision of a simple life, an orderly life that's built on practices that help exercise us unto godliness. Mm-hmm. That was so inspiring. But the second thing that was so inspiring was how Richard was drawing from all of these sources from across the Christian tradition, and some very ancient sources too, including some Desert Fathers and Mothers. So that was really the start of it. When I became a pastor, lead pastor for the first time up in Denver, I remember finding my way to Henry Nouwen pretty quickly for inspiration and guidance and what I was supposed to be doing. And he wrote a wonderful book called The Way of the Heart, which I know you've read. Yep. That's based on desert wisdom. Flee, be silent, and pray always. Solitude, silence, and prayer. Those are the ways in which we construct a spiritual. So I knew about them, and I've been drinking from that well for a little bit. But it was a personal crisis, I think, that really threw me deeply into the wisdom of the fathers and mothers. And that was 5 years ago. When we moved here, I'd been at the church in Denver, which we loved. And I always said, I'm going to be here for the rest of my life, and he wrote the book, The Power of Place. That's what we believed in and believe in still. Right. If you can, find a group of people and find a place that you can love. And I remember thinking, if I die preaching at 95 in this pulpit, they can bury me in the backyard and we'll call it a life. That'd be a great thing. And, our God is a God of surprise. Mm-hmm. And in 2016, we started feeling some stirrings in our spirit that it was time to change. And in 17, we found our way here. And I was not prepared for the spiritual crisis that was going to create in my own life. And I thought the hard thing was letting go of that church and just moving. But the hard thing was actually after, like really kind of getting clean in my own spirit. And I was 3 or 4 months into our transition here. And I honestly, it took me a long time to come up with language for it, but I honestly felt like I'd been put in a witness protection program because I was so bound up with my identity in Denver, what I did, how I preached, what the church was about, that to leave that behind, I couldn't find my equilibrium. It was like, well, here's your new job, here are your new friends, here's your new house, here's your new city, here's your new identity. Have a nice life. And you go, wow.
And by the way, we don't need you to do a heck of a lot day one.
That's
right.
Let's
talk about that.
Nobody's asking you to come and rescue this thing.
Right.
And that was so hard for me. I mean, you had a front row seat and like, what the heck is wrong with this guy? I couldn't find myself.
Here's what I was thinking though in that time. So he comes into the Friday night congregation with me as the associate pastor and he's preaching, once a month at that point. And I was thinking to myself, what's it like for a guy who's used to leading a congregation and preaching every week and setting vision and leading the staff to come sit in the front row 3 out of 4 weeks and just listen and just, I'm not needed. They don't. What was that like for you? Because a part of this Streams in the Wasteland is there's this purgation that the Desert Fathers and Mothers go through when they leave the city, when they leave the big thing, when God calls them away into silence and solitude and rest and quietness. I can't take us into what that was like for you to not be needed to rescue a thing.
It was a purgation. Yeah, it was such a naked feeling. To sit on the front row and to go, I used to be that guy, or to watch Pastor Brady doing his thing, sitting in the first chair. I used to be that guy. I know what that feels like. I loved doing that. Do I know who I am apart from that? Will I ever get to do that again? And so part of the difficulty of coming here was really settling into the season and learning to embrace all that God had for me without jumping into the next thing. And in the first year that I was out here, man, it was every 2 weeks. I was coming up, I've said this to other people, but I was concocting my own comeback tale. So I was planning on, I'm going to go plant a church here, or I'm going to do this next thing or whatever. And I felt like in all of those spaces, the Lord was like, stop, just stay like in this place. So to back up the tape a little bit, I was 3 or 4 months in, very disoriented, feeling very naked and not knowing what to do about it. And a friend of mine, somebody who went to our old congregation in Denver, said, well, you need to read the Desert Fathers and Mothers. And I said, well, I know about them. He said, no, you just really need to read them. And I said, well, why? And he said, because the thing that you feel like is being thrust upon you, that is a real burden and a trial for you, these folks saw it. They actually went out of their way to throw off reputation, to throw off status, to abandon power, to abandon possessions, to abandon everything, all of the trappings of identity that made them, and to seek God in the barren places, the desolate places. And they actually found that the desert was a place of renewal and awakening. You'd really benefit from it. So I started reading them.
The desert didn't happen to them as much as they began to choose it as a way of life.
Well, and they needed it because Roman society was morally bankrupt. And the desert movement really happens. For those folks that don't know, the Desert Fathers and Mothers are a group of people that flee institutional Christianity and they flee the empire, really, in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries. Right at the time that Christianity and the empire are becoming cozy with one another, they felt like not only is the empire morally bankrupt, but Christianity is losing its soul. And so they retreat into the deserts of Egypt, Syria, and Palestine to seek God. And they're really the proto-monastic movement. And David Bentley Hart says that they actually sparked a renewal movement in Christianity. So they did. So they went away to seek God in the wilderness, recover the radical way of Jesus. And pretty soon people are traveling from hundreds of miles away to sit at their feet and go, you guys have something that we need. Show us how to do that. And they sit at their feet, listen to their wisdom, and carry it back into the Roman Empire, institutional Christianity. And so monasticism springs up out of them. So they sought it out. And as I immersed myself in their wisdom, I bought Benedict Ward's alphabetical collection of the sayings of the Desert Fathers and Mothers. And I would sit, normal routine in the morning, an hour of reading the scriptures and prayer. And then I would read those sayings, and somehow they seeped into the water supply of my spirituality. And they gave me language for making sense of the desolate place. And here was the thing that happened to me, is that they taught me that, like Rowan Williams says, that the desert is the place where God happens. And we see that in Scripture, that in the wilderness, the children of Israel find God. His glory is manifest in Jesus. After the baptism, the Spirit thrusts him out into the wilderness, and he emerges from the wilderness full of the Spirit. The wilderness is the place where God happened. And my own healing was not complete, and my own purification was not complete until I got to the point where I never, in my heart, I never needed to lead again. I never needed to be a senior pastor again. I never needed some of those outward trappings to make me feel secure again. I actually fell in love with, like, my God and my all. I have nothing in this world, but I have everything with you. Yeah. And I'm breathing today. I'm alive today. And I'm on top of all, as if that weren't enough. And I know you today. And if that weren't enough, I'm married to this woman, and I have these children, and they're beautiful, and I have friends that love me and are caring for me. Whom am I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire. And when you get to that place, it changes the way you move forward again into your callings. And so when some of the opportunities started opening back up, it was neat because I was a different person inside of them, no longer clinging to it to try to complete something in me, but holding it with the kind of open-handedness that comes, I think, from real spiritual freedom, which is not like I've arrived at it or something, but that's what I think the desert does to us. And pretty soon what I started seeing was that there are a lot of people that are in kind of a wasteland spiritually, and we need language for making sense of how God arrives to us in the wasteland. Hence the book. Kind of my attempt to just help people see where God is in those places where it feels like the world has fallen apart.
And speaking of helping people see, one of the great icons, the literary icons of the Christian moment that we're in, most people don't know him. He's kind of lived out in, it's ironic because he sort of lived out in the wasteland, but his name is Byron Borger. And Byron was Eugene Peterson's own personal book guy. So Eugene would call Byron and say, hey, I'm writing on this and I need resources on that. Who should I be reading? And Byron would send him 8 books and Eugene would devour it. And then Eugene would call him and would say, hey, buy 10 of these copies and send these to my friends. So Byron's a baller. Byron read your book and wrote a review on it. And basically, he said that for most of his adult life, he understood the desert, the fathers and mothers, to sort of be wasteful, to be retreaters, to people who ran away from the world. And he said that Andrew Arndt's book, this book, changed his mind on the desert fathers and mothers, which is a big deal to change a 70-year-old's mind who has read broadly. So, like, talk to us about why their lives, the way they chose to live, was not a wasteful move.
I think sometimes a situation pushes you into the extreme, and the only thing that you can do is run to save your life, you know? So it's hard for us to put ourselves back in their shoes because we don't know exactly what they were experiencing, but apparently it was extreme enough that they went, Thomas Merton said that they regarded both society and the church as a shipwreck that they had to flee from. So I think it's easy for us with 1,700 years of hindsight to look at them and go, well, okay, you bunch of, what you really are is a bunch of socially awkward misanthropes who justified your retreat with spiritual language. But I don't think that's true. I think that sometimes a situation is so toxic that you have to separate from it. And you have to find the love of God and you have to find the love of others again. And so I think a mischaracterization of them is that they severed themselves from the church, which actually isn't true. So when you start reading their literature, even if they've created some creative distance between them and society and themselves and the church, they still live in community with one another and they still go to church.
The Bible is still their book.
They read the Bible and they're in love with the Bible. And because they live with the scriptures, they see things in the scriptures that other people don't see. And they also submit themselves to the worshiping community and to the faith of the church. So they're I mean, it's a little anachronistic to say this, but they're Nicene Orthodoxy. They're inside and they're dedicated to that. But what they're also dedicated to is a purity of life that's difficult to achieve given the circumstances that the church and society found themselves in. So what I think is, and this is again is something that Thomas Merton said a long time ago, he said that now, whereas 1,700 years ago, you had to flee the society and the church to find the wilderness, he said now we're living in a spiritual wasteland, that it's all around us. Our society, Henry Nouwen said, is not a society radiant with the love of God. So we're actually in it right now, which is why I think their wisdom is wisdom for our time. We don't have to go somewhere else.
It came to us.
Yeah, it came to us. So what does it look like to cultivate? Because this is what they're helping us do, is they're helping us cultivate true humanness. So what does it look like in our situation to cultivate true humanness? And they would tell us, well, we need to root ourselves again in prayer, solitude, silence, and prayer. We need to root ourselves in community again. And then we need to see our lives as fundamentally oriented to be a blessing to the world and not in terms of self-preservation. And if we can cultivate those things, we might actually chance of ourselves becoming a stream in the wasteland for other people.
Man. You say in Saving Speech, the chapter on our tongue, if our speech is going to rise to the level of the kingdom of God, we'll have to pass through a kind of vocal purgatory first. Our verbal way of being must die before it can be brought to life. The mortification of the tongue is a critical issue in the spirituality of the desert, and Abba Agathon related that, quote, no passion is worse than an uncontrolled tongue because it is the mother of all the passions. So take us into saving speech. What does it look like to have our speech purged, cleansed, healed in this moment in time? So I'll thicken it out just a little bit. I think that gossip is like sideways energy.
Yeah.
It's something hurt me. There was a moment that there was a breaking of trust.
Yeah.
But Abba Poyman says, teach your mouth to say what is in your heart. Direct.
Yes.
Teach your mouth to say what is in your heart to the person that can do something about it. So
Yes.
gossip is sideways speech.
Yes.
You hurt me, and now I'm going to go over here, and I'm
Yes.
going to leak.
Yes.
And so talk to us about the purgation of the tongue, the healing of the tongue, saving speech in this moment.
Well, it's one of the most critical issues, I think, in our moment, because everybody's running off at the mouth. And we have a lot of social media, I think, has pushed us in this direction, where we are invited to, and more than that, we are rewarded for popping off and adding more heat to the conversation than light, which is why we're living in an increasingly polarized society. So to back it all the way up, as brief as I can, think about, and you asked the question about speech, let's just think about first principles. Let's think about God first. God's speech is creative speech that gives life. And one of the great gifts that he gives human beings is the ability to speak and to give life, to shape reality. So he tells Adam, so let there be light, and there was light. And then he says to Adam, you name the animals. So we can shape reality. And that's both for good and for evil. Death and life are in the tongue. Proverbs 18:21. So fallen man can take the power of the word, and he can thwart and twist and warp and cause reality to fray. So Paul says, don't let any unwholesome words come out of your mouth, but only what's helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And then he says, don't grieve the Holy Spirit of God, that it grieves the Spirit when our words are used in a way that tears down. And this is what these guys are trying and gals are trying to teach us, is they're trying to teach us, look, we're so corrupt in our speech that we don't, not only are we just popping off at the mouth, but we also are being silent in the times when we should speak up. That's what gossip is.
Yes.
Gossip is the sideways speech. I got something to say to you, but I'd rather just kind of back channel it over here, and then maybe it'll get around to you, rather than saying directly to you the thing that's helpful for you, even if it's hard.
Yeah.
And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to teach us silence. Set a watch over your mouth so that for a second you can create some distance between your own being and your words so that you can see how words behave. And then when you pick speech back up, now because you've been sensitized again by the Spirit and you've been reoriented to the love of God and others, you can use your words.
You're a steward, not an assassin.
And so, exactly. And so sometimes your words are going to be a sweet balm on the wounds of other people. But other times, like a skilled surgeon, you're going to see something that needs to be cut out. And so you're going to leverage the sword of the Spirit to cut that out, but you're not going to do it with collateral damage.
Right.
You've got skill in doing it. We need more people like this, because the issues in our society, the issues in the church are so urgent. They do demand that somebody speak about them, but we need the right kinds of people to speak about them. Or else what we're doing is adding heat, and we're not adding light. We're not adding discernment to the situation. So some creative distance, I think, would be good for us, and remembering, what are our words for?
So give us a couple practices with this word, where we are in this moment with our phones, with social media, with all these platforms that reward us for being stupid with our words.
I'll give
how
you.
do we?
I'll give you two. No, I'll give you three. One is you can limit your social media to say once a day or twice a day that you jump on and you've got something thoughtful to say, or you do the interactions that you need to do. But because the device rewards you for being on it, I mean, that's a dopamine hit.
Turn off all notifications.
Yeah, so you got those 18 notifications on Twitter or Instagram or wherever, and it feels so good. It's trying to coax you onto it. I've shut off all those notifications on. I go on, I choose when I go on. That's a big one. Like, take some control back there. The second thing I think that you can do with regard to social media is sleep on your tweets. So if you got something to say, maybe draft it. And then if you wake up in the morning and you still feel good about what you're saying and you feel like this represents the kingdom of God and this is really going to be helpful to others, set that sucker loose. But there's no real urgency that demands that you respond. Like the quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouting of a ruler among fools, says Ecclesiastes. That's the second thing. But I think the third big thing, and this is in the interpersonal space, I've been saying to a lot of people lately that I think that maybe the greatest moral achievement of our age is, can we sit in a room with people with whom we vehemently disagree and neither feel the need to conquer them with our words or our arguments or feel the need to bail out and run away? Right. Can we hold the space? And the way that we practice that, I think the first way that we practice that is by preferring to be the last person to speak. Tell me and like cultivating genuine curiosity. Tell me what you think about that. Tell me, what are your motivations? What are the values that drive that? And you might actually see that some of the values that they hold are similar to your own values. It's just that they arrived at different conclusions. Now we can actually have a conversation. So part of the reason that we can't have conversations in our time is because everybody is there's just an anxiousness about winning people over to our side. And the desert is trying to convince us, if God is all you need to be complete and whole, then you don't need to win people over to your side. You can actually permit them the freedom to be different from you, other than you, ideologically, politically, even theologically, and hold that space in a way that doesn't fracture it with sin. So prefer to have the last word in things. Prefer not to win arguments. Try, in those spaces that you inhabit with other people that are different from you, try to take their side in the argument. Like one of the stories from the desert that's so funny is there were these two brothers, I'm rambling on and on here, but there are these two brothers that lived together and they were constantly fighting with each other, always in an argument. And this went on and on and on for a long time. And finally, one of them said, I got an idea. The next time we come to an argument, you take my side, I take your side. And the story goes, they did that, and for the rest of their days, they lived in peace. It's something like that.
I actually don't know how to argue.
I can't argue if I'm taking your side, because now I've so inhabited your thoughts that I have sympathy for what's going on in your mind. Right. And now we're colleagues again, and we're not combatants. Little things like that is what they teach us. I think we need to cultivate those practices.
Do you have a favorite father or mother? Do you has one risen in all of your reading? And I know it's been vast. Do you have a couple that stand out as like, yeah, those are my people. I love their approach to life, or a story that stands out?
I will give you my favorite of the stories.
Please.
Thank you for asking this, because there was a chapter that I wanted to include in the book that I just ran out of space and I couldn't include it. One of the things that surprised me when I read the Desert Fathers and Mothers for the first time was how charismatic they are.
Yeah.
So as a non-denominational Pentecostal charismatic, it was rewarding for me to read through their stuff and be like, I'm not crazy.
I'm not crazy.
I know these people. I grew up with these people. The miraculous routinely follows them. Oh. What's interesting is that they have a very different approach to the miraculous as it relates to their own reputation, as you might imagine. So here's this is my favorite of my favorite stories, is there was a guy by the name of Longinus, and he was known to have gifts of healing. And there was a woman in a neighboring town that was diagnosed with breast cancer. And this was 4th century, so that's a death sentence. Right. And she's panicking. And the townspeople say to her, well, what you could do is you could go to the neighboring town and you could see Abba Longinus, because he has gifts of healing and he might be able to heal you. She goes, okay, fine. So she gets up and she starts heading out towards the next town. And when she gets to the edge of the town, Longinus is out there in the fields working, but she doesn't know it's him. And so he says to her, who are you looking for? And she goes, I'm looking for Longinus. And he goes, well, why are you looking for that idiot? Or whatever. And she goes, well, I've heard that he's got gifts of healing. I got this thing, and I thought maybe he could make it better. And he goes, you don't want to talk to that guy. He's a fool. He's a charlatan. He's don't have anything to do with Longinus. Now, what's your problem again? And she like points out the area. And he goes, well, get on over here. And he makes the sign of the cross over the afflicted area. And he goes, now go home. I'm like, what? So she goes back to the neighboring town. And as she goes, just like in the Gospels, as they went, they were healed. As she goes, she's healed. And she gets back. And they go, well, what happened to you? And she tells the whole story. And they go, that was him. That was Longinus. You had an encounter with the man himself, but you didn't know it.
Exactly.
Because he fled from his reputation. And that is a sharp rebuke to the movement that we came from. Jeez. And it's a very sharp rebuke, actually, I think, to the wider Christian world, where we have spiritual gifts, but we exploit them for our own benefit. And all of a sudden, we've built a brand, we've built a reputation, we've built a platform, we've become something because of them. These guys fled from it. Mm-hmm. And the Longinus story, to me, it's not that like God still used him in spite of the fact that he fled from his reputation. No. God used him because he fled from his reputation. So those of us with status, those of us with power, as all of us are discovering our spiritual gifts and learning how to leverage them for the good of the world, can we at the same time remain humble? Because if we cultivate that humility, the odds are very good that God's just going to keep dumping blessing out on us, and the last laugh is going to belong to us. I've got to believe that Longinus went back to his cell and he went,
just loved it. Yes.
Thou shalt not let thy left hand know what thy right hand is doing. Let it all be done in secret. And I think I think that we could learn a lesson from him. That's my favorite story.
I love it. Okay, so you dedicated this book for the saints of Believers Church, Marshfield, Wisconsin, which I've been to multiple times, circa 1981 to 1999. Who first showed me holiness. Your witness still inspires me. You said that it was about 17, 18 years old where Richard Foster introduced you to this world, and it was really only 5 years ago that you did a deep dive into this world. But as you dove deep into this world, you actually discovered that you grew up around these people.
That's true.
So tell me about, what does it look like for us to have these kinds of desert fathers and mothers hiding in plain sight? Right now, what do they look like?
Nobody's going to do a write-up of them in Christianity Today. All due respect and love for CT if you're out there listening, or Outreach Magazine and Relevant or wherever. They're hidden. They're hidden. And the way that you'll notice them is that, like Paul says, good deeds can't be hidden. Mm-hmm. The way that you'll notice them is that there is just this aura of Christ. There's an aura of humility about them. They're not looking to become the greatest. They're not looking for status in your church. They're living decent and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness, and a trail of good deeds follows them everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I grew up around people like this. Nobody ever did a write-up of Believers Church in Marshfield. Nobody ever did a write-up of these great saints. I mean, talk about an old lady in there, Ola, who, extravagant stories of the miraculous. Ran around, like they trailed her everywhere she went, and she was just like Longinus. Those things would happen, and she would go, oh my gosh, like she was in Shopko one time, an old department store, and people are getting slain in the spirit while she's shopping. This true story. And she ran out of Shopko and got into her car, and she went, Lord, if you ever do that to me again. Turn that off. That's right, turn that off. That was really embarrassing. Those people, I've discovered they are everywhere. You'll know them by their humility, and you'll know them by their good deeds. Just watch for them. We're surrounded by these people.
Friends, I've read this book, and it just blazes with holiness. There's a purity about it, an innocence about it. And don't sleep on Andrew Arndt's writing. This guy is a genius. But this thing radiates with the kind of call that he's inviting us into. So make sure you pick this book up, Streams in the Wasteland, Finding Spiritual Renewal with the Desert Fathers and Mothers by Andrew Arndt. Like it, review it, all that good stuff. But this book will change your life for the good. Andrew, thank you so much for telling us about this book today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.